This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/audio.
I walk a straight line, shackled and chained. Oh, gruesome Gertie is calling my name. There is no mercy in this penitentiary. Just ask the Hill String Gang or Angola 3. Die inside these walls, inside the wire. And when the wolf cries, I know it's over. Oh, bloody Angola. Oh, bloody
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Bloody Angola, a podcast 142 years in the making, the complete story of America's bloodiest prison. I'm Jim Chapman, and we are back with the second episode in the Peaceful Warrior series. Of course, the conviction and incarceration of Eric Mickelson and Christy Plea. So the last time we left you, Eric Mickelson had confessed to the murder, dismemberment, and disposal of the remains of Christy Plea in dumpsters around Caddo Parish, Louisiana. And while police are working to locate those remains, on Friday, July 20th of 2007, the funeral for Charles Martin is held at First Baptist Church in Bossier City, Louisiana. Also around this time, more information comes out through the confession made regarding Christy Plea's death. Now, it seems that though Mickelson told detectives he disposed of Christy's remains in dumpsters, that was not initially what he did. According to Mickelson, he strangled Christy with his bare hands, then disposed of her body in a pond on his property, even claiming that he had to weigh the body down. Then he said sometime later that he moved the remains to several other locations. And to tell you how sick this sumbitch was, police, when they're trying to get an idea of where Christy's remains are, they asked him, Eric, don't you think her family deserves closure? And of course, you never get closure, right? When something like this happens, you might get what you would consider justice, but you're never going to get closure. But irregardless of that, they asked Eric Mickelson that, and his response was, let it be a festered, open wound that is half-ass healed now, quote unquote. What an asshole. So on August 23rd of 2007, the Caddo Parish Sheriff's Office, they charged Mickelson with second-degree murder in the death of Christy Plea, saying Mickelson's confession was corroborated with evidence found near a location he said to have left Christy's body. Then on September 5th of 2007, Mickelson and Arthur were indicted by a Caddo Parish grand jury on the first-degree murder charges for the death of Charles Martin. So about 10 days after he's charged with the second-degree murder charge in the death of Christy O'Pry. Now, Betty Copeland, Beverly Arthur's mother, said, "If she killed Charlie, I hope she gets what she deserves. Life," of course, referring to her daughter. "They didn't have any mercy on Charlie. Poor Charlie, he didn't deserve that. This is not my little girl. This is a monster. Susie is a smart girl and a good girl, but she got on drugs and started doing bad things." Betty also gave a little bit of breaking news to investigators when she told them that Charles Martin came to her house around midnight the day before he was reported missing. And he was questioning Betty about Mickelson, Betty said. She was quoted as saying, "Charlie knocked on the door and asked me, 'Is that the same Eric that Susie knew from Amelia Street?' I told him yes, and he left," she said. So police have all this evidence / information / witnesses saying things. And even with all that, it took 5 freaking years to get from the point of Mickelson confessing to this shit and Arthur and actually going to trial. And Mickelson was up for trial first, and he was up for the murder of Charles Martin. This is on July 30th, 2011. And during the trial, Mickelson's attorney, Mario Guatemala, said that Eric Mickelson did not possess the specific intent to kill Charles Martin, and did so only because his mentally damaged brain, quote unquote, was taken over by cocaine. And that statement is going to become very important as we go on today. His attorney also said that Mickelson was Arthur's puppet throughout the crime and used him like she did Charles Martin to obtain drugs. The defense attorney referred to Charles Martin as Arthur's sugar daddy, quote unquote, and said Arthur is a predator willing to do whatever is necessary to get what she wants. So he's doing what any defense attorney should do, and he's trying to point the light away from his client, right? But it's interesting that even Mickelson turns on Arthur, and basically his defense attorney blames everything on her. She's a manipulator, right? She manipulated Charles Martin. She manipulated Eric Mickelson. She's just this girl going around wanting drugs and manipulating all these men, and that's why Mickelson killed Charles Martin. Just ridiculous shit. No responsibility for Mickelson, right? Now, Caddo Assistant District Attorney Leah Hall read from a statement Mickelson gave the police in which he said, quote unquote, "I wrung his neck like a pit bull would lock up." The audio of this interrogation was played, and Mickelson is heard saying on that audio in open court, "I locked up like a pit bull. I locked up and he quit hissing. He quit grunting. He quit everything." Members of the jury were shown photos of Charles' dismembered body. Sergeant Danny Duddy, a Shreveport police crime scene investigator, said it appears the arms, legs, and head were separated from the torso. It appears there were some tool marks or damages to the side of the torso. So what they're trying to do there is they're trying to paint a picture of how heinous this actual crime was. He didn't just choke him and Charles Martin died, this 86-year-old war hero. After he did that, he chopped him into fucking pieces. And he wants that jury, obviously the prosecutor, they want that jury to have that picture and feel absolutely no mercy for Eric Mickelson because he overkilled in this case. Now, according to court testimony, Arthur had been getting money from Charles, but he was threatening to cut Beverly Arthur off, and they're trying to establish motive, right? Why would Eric Mickelson do this? Why would Beverly Arthur do it? Well, it was all about money and getting drugs and those sorts of things. The jury also heard jailhouse phone calls of Mickelson admitting on those phone calls to killing Charles to his mother. Mickelson had hoped to take all of the blame for the crime, according to his jail calls, so that his girlfriend would be free. But we know, now that we have the benefit of hindsight looking at that trial, that was far from the truth. He may have been saying it on those phone calls, but when it came down to reality, they were trying to point everything at Beverly Arthur. So on August 2nd of 2011, Eric Dale Mickelson is found guilty of first-degree murder in Charles Martin's death. And it took the jury only about an hour to reach that verdict. Now, first-degree murder in the state of Louisiana, he's in a bind, right? That is the death penalty on the table when you're convicted of first-degree murder in the state of Louisiana. So his sentencing is scheduled for just a week later. And on August 10th of 2011, Mickelson is indeed sentenced to death for the murder of Charles Martin. Now, at the sentencing hearing, Christy O'Price's daughter, who was 18 by this time, she said Eric Mickelson got just what he deserved. And I'm glad the court went the way it did today. I think that was the most difficult part, just having no idea what had really happened to my mom, referring to Christy O'Price. Mickelson was sent to Angola to serve his sentence on death row and eventually get that needle, right? So 2 years later, and I don't know why it took 2 years to get to the point where Beverly Arthur's trial came up. It's ridiculous how slow things moved. 5 years it took Eric Mickelson to actually go to trial after a confession. This was a situation where the guy confessed. They had tons of evidence. They had people saying that just the day before the deceased, Charles Martin, the guy killed, was at their house, meaning Beverly Arthur and her mother's house. You got all that evidence. It still took you 5 years to bring the guy to trial. Then it takes another 2 to get to Beverly Arthur's trial. But it finally begins. This is on April of 2013. So Arthur enters a guilty plea in Caddo Parish District Court to second-degree murder in Charles Martin's death. And that kind of surprised me. Apparently, I am opining here, but I would think that first-degree murder was on the table, which means the death penalty is on the table, and she took a plea to second-degree murder, which is life in prison in Louisiana. A lot better than death, I guess, in her eyes. But I would have been surprised with a first-degree charge when you weren't the one actually committing the murder. But in this case, something happens, and she pled to second-degree murder, and you don't do that without a deal. You got nothing to lose if they're going to automatically charge you with that anyway. But that's what she did, and District Judge Ramona Emanuel sentences Arthur to life in prison without the benefit of parole, probation, or suspension of sentence. And Arthur, of course, was immediately remanded to the custody of the Louisiana Department of Corrections. So at this point in time, you have Eric Mickelson. He's awaiting the needle. He's in Louisiana State Penitentiary's death row, Bloody Angola, and you have Beverly Author in jail for the rest of her life, right? No problems. We're just waiting on justice to serve. Well, there was a big problem. A year later, in September of 2014, a shocking ruling is made when the Louisiana Supreme Court completely throws out the conviction and the death sentence for Eric Mickelson. So let's talk about this for a second. Not only did they take the death penalty off the table, he had been sentenced to death, they totally threw that out. They didn't just say, well, you're getting life in prison instead. They threw out the fucking conviction. This dude gets a brand new trial. It's not unprecedented that this stuff happens, but it's very rare, especially when someone's been sentenced to death. So what happened to make the Supreme Court vote 4-3 to throw out his conviction and his death sentence? Well, apparently Mickelson had appealed his conviction, and he argued that the district court failed to allow the defense to exercise what's known as a preemptory challenge and excuse a prospective juror from the case because he would not consider intoxication as a mitigating factor in the sentencing phase. Now, part of Mickelson's defense was that he was high on cocaine. Remember? I told you that at the time of the murder. And so let's break this down. A juror actually said that even if Mickelson was high on cocaine, it doesn't excuse him from killing somebody. And I would place my vote in court as him being guilty, regardless of what his mental condition was at the time of the murders. That's okay. Everybody has their opinion, and that was his. The problem was they didn't dismiss him at that point. That was a major problem. As a matter of fact, let's get into it. Caddo District Court Judge Scott Crichton, he denied the defense request to bring the juror back for further questioning in order to challenge the inclusion of the juror. Crichton reminded counsel that it is inappropriate to take one isolated, out-of-context statement of one prospective juror and micro-dissect it to the point of reaching an absurd result, in his opinion. Now, the Supreme Court found that the juror did not make just a one out-of-context statement, but that he stated unequivocally on the record, not once, but 5 times, that he would not consider evidence of intoxication as a mitigating factor in his determination of the appropriate sentence. The ruling also stated, rather than retract from that statement, the last time he was questioned on the subject, he indicated that not only would he not consider intoxication as a mitigating circumstance, but that he would give the guy the penalty if he was on drugs and alcohol and goes out and kills somebody. And he emphasized, yes, I would do that, repeating his lack of equivocation. The final response to questioning indicates not just an unwillingness to consider intoxication as a mitigating factor in the sentencing during determination, but a predisposition to vote for the death penalty if drugs or alcohol fueled the crime. When a prospective juror is not excused for cause and the defense exhausts its preemptory challenges, as occurred here, this is reversible error. So they fucked up, for lack of a better term. You had this juror, this prospective juror that ended up being chosen on that jury, telling in voir dire that whether someone's high or on drugs or drunk or whatever, if they go out and kill somebody, they're responsible. That's okay. He can have that opinion, and I'm not saying I disagree with him, but the problem is the defense objected to that juror, and they would not dismiss that juror based off of that statement, and it came back to totally bite them in the ass. It's absolutely crazy. But Mickelson gets a new trial. It was set to start on October of 2015. And this guy who has been sentenced to death now not only has an opportunity to get off of death row, but get out of jail completely over this mistake. That's why it's so important that every T is crossed and every I is dotted. So they do this whole thing, this whole trial over again. Can you believe it? So on October 2015, once again, Mickelson's trial begins, and it was not without its theatrics. Let's just say that. Even threats from counsel, lawyers threatening other lawyers. At one point during the retrial, Caddo District Attorney Dale Cox threatened to cut the throats of defense counsel representing Mickelson. In court documents, Mickelson's defense counsel wrote that they were within earshot of Cox when they overheard the prosecutor tell his co-counsel he wanted to kill everyone in here, quote unquote. I want to cut their fucking throats. I'm just being honest. And if any of them want to go outside, we can do it right now, he said. According to the transcript attached to the filing, the comments were made while First Judicial District Court Judge Catherine Dora, who was presiding over the case, was out of the room. So lead defense attorney Catherine Sheely, she questioned Mickelson's close friend and his mother, and each spoke about how Mickelson could be delusional. Imagine that. Claiming to have special powers such as the ability to levitate, and frequently has out-of-body experiences. They also talked about his crack cocaine addiction and its effects on his mental state. Now, the defense also called a forensic psychiatrist and a neuropsychologist. Both spoke on Mickelson's mental stability, claiming he suffered from schizoaffective disorder, which is characterized by suffering from symptoms of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Forensic psychologist Dr. Brushin Akbar said that Mickelson was delusional, citing his claim to have made $3.6 million by stealing quarters from vending machines. And he used that as a major example. Of course, that was total bullshit. Mickelson did not ever in his life have $3.6 million. DA Dale Cox said the fact that two doctors say he had schizoaffective disorder and was impulsive does not necessarily mean he had an extreme mental disturbance. Indeed, everything about Mickelson's conduct before, during, and after the murder of Charles Martin reveals that he was cold, calculated, and under complete control. And so there is not extreme mental or emotional disturbance. Cox used Mickelson's own words against him during his closing arguments, saying, "I'm a killer and I love wringing people's neck." And what was he trying to get at there, that DA? What's he trying to prove, and what was the defense trying to prove? Obviously, the defense is trying to prove that Mickelson is crazy, he's out of his mind. But the problem is the premeditation and post-meditation with this crime. When you make an effort to conceal the fact that you committed a crime, in this case, they buried and hid Charles Martin's remains. When you make an effort to do that, you're proving at that point that you knew it was wrong because you're trying to cover it up. And if you know right from wrong in the eyes of the law, you're not crazy. So he knew what he was doing was wrong because he tried to hide and cover it up, right? And I think the prosecution did a good job of pointing that out. Now, thankfully, at the retrial, Mickelson was again convicted, thankfully. But Mickelson was taken off of death row and was granted life in prison without parole by that second Caddo Parish jury. So that one mistake with that one juror in the very first trial totally flipped Mickelson's fate. Instead of facing the death penalty, which he faced it at that second trial, there was an opportunity, but the jury would not give him the death penalty that second time around. So that one mistake made that big of a difference. So Christy O'Price's sister, she commented about the sentence change from death to life. And she said, if what he didn't deserve the death penalty, nothing does. In the state of Louisiana, they put people on death row, but they don't kill people. They hardly ever do. Charles' grandson said a killer, a murderer that murdered countless people and is proud of it, he gets to live out the rest of his life in prison. I figured they'd give him the death penalty, especially with what this guy did. Every guard is going to have to walk him to and from, and every single person is in grave danger. He added, to make us go back through it, and then at the end of it, just one more dagger. We pray for Eric Mickelson's soul. Now, by 2018, Mickelson had exhausted all of his appeals, and even as of today, remains in prison for the rest of his life. And what about Christy O'Price? Well, sadly, Christy O'Price's remains have never been found. And Mickelson, though charged, was never tried for her murder. Now, on July 10th of 2016, her family did hold a memorial service for Christy. And in lieu of flowers, the family requested memorial donations be made to Dog Tired Ranch, the living memorial of Christy Gwen O'Price. And this living memorial celebrates Christy's life and blesses the lives of many in her honor every day. So Dog Tired Ranch has celebrated over 2,000 dogs being adopted in Christy's name. And y'all, that gives me absolute goosebumps. I stumbled across another podcast, as a matter of fact, while looking at this case. And a poem I thought was fitting for this episode, her sister shared via this podcast or on this other podcast. And she wrote, "The loss of her, the loss of anyone, my sister, my blood. So many years of uncertainty, words could never express the sadness. Happier she is with beaming smiles and radiant eyes of glow. An invisible plane right before me. Her scent still lingering in my soul. Good night to you, but where are you? Oh God, holding back emotions, learning to live with such agony, numb. My family, an empty place, an empty space where she should be. How do I do? What do I say? Hold back. I still can't imagine visions haunting my being forever. Where is she? Where could she be? She could be under my feet. Oh God, mend me. I could have walked right past her. I could have been down the street. I look up at the black night sky and say, good night, for I know she is here with me." And that was a poem from her sister that she wrote shortly after her disappearance. As for Charles Martin, his headstone reflects the way in which he lived as a heroic tribute, saying, Charles Martin, Corporal, U.S. Army, World War II, May 14th, 1921 to July 11th, 2007. Purple Heart. And right there, as the last line on that headstone reads, Peaceful Warrior. And there it is. Thank you so much for listening. And next week, we have another crazy case for you, complete with conviction and incarceration into Bloody Angola. But we're going to bring you on a journey to a bunch of killings in New Orleans as we cover the Storyville Slayer of New Orleans. So that's coming to you next week. Check out the Patreon if you would like to help support what we do here at Bloody Angola. Thank you, as always, to Rachel Spillers and Rachel Spillers Research for the amazing details provided for this episode. And until next time, for Bloody Angola, a podcast 142 years in the making, the complete story of America's bloodiest prison, I'm Jim Chapman. Peace.
I walk a straight line, shackled and chained. Oh, gruesome Gertie is calling my name. There is no mercy in this penitentiary. Just ask the Hillstream gang around